So, picture this. It's 1914, and Europe is just erupting into what we now call World War I. But over in the United States, the official policy was to stay out of it. Completely. President Woodrow Wilson wanted America to be the peaceful mediator. But somehow, in just 3 short years, American soldiers were shipping out to the trenches in Europe. Let's dig into how that dramatic flip actually happened.
Right? How does a whole country go from being so determined to stay neutral to jumping headfirst into a massive global war? It's a huge question, and that's the puzzle we're going to piece together here, looking at all the key moments and the mounting pressures that finally pulled America into the Great War. First things first, to really get this, you have to understand just how big a deal neutrality was for America. This wasn't some new policy cooked up in 1914. No, this was a core part of the American identity, an idea that went all the way back to the country's founding. I mean, there it is, straight from George Washington himself. He basically warned the new nation, don't get tangled up in Europe's drama. For most Americans at the time, this war felt like somebody else's problem, just a bunch of old empires fighting over old grudges that had nothing to do with them. But here's the thing, that ideal of everyone standing together in neutrality, it ran headfirst into a really complicated reality. You see, America was a nation of immigrants, and the war in Europe created these deep personal divisions right at home. It made having one clear, unified foreign policy almost impossible. And this internal split was a massive problem. On one side, you had a lot of Americans who felt a natural connection to Great Britain. I mean, they shared a language, culture, and democratic ideals. But on the other side, you had millions of German Americans who naturally sympathized with their homeland. And then you had a huge number of Irish Americans who were strongly anti-British. So, true neutrality, it was like walking a political tightrope. So even with the public split right down the middle, 2 huge forces started pulling the U.S. away from its neutral corner. And they were, you guessed it, money and a rapidly escalating war at sea. You see, even though America was officially neutral, its wallet was definitely not. American banks were loaning billions of dollars to the Allies, Britain and France. Trade with them was absolutely booming. But trade with Germany? It was basically choked off by a British naval blockade. So what did that mean? Well, it meant that American prosperity was getting more and more tied to an Allied victory. Now, Germany, of course, was watching all of this. And they responded with a brand new and frankly terrifying weapon, the U-boat, the submarine. Their plan was to sink any ships heading for Allied ports. This was a direct threat to America's right to trade as a neutral country, and it was about to have some deadly consequences. And this was the moment that sent shockwaves across the United States. The Lusitania wasn't a warship. It was a civilian passenger liner. When a German U-boat torpedoed it without any warning, it sparked absolute outrage back in America. 128. That's how many Americans were on that ship and died in the attack. And suddenly, this wasn't some distant European squabble anymore. It was personal. American lives had been lost, and any trust the public had in Germany was pretty much shattered. After the Lusitania, there was so much backlash that Germany actually backed off its submarine attacks for a while, but that calm didn't last. By early 1917, things started escalating fast. A whole series of events happened one after another that made it nearly impossible for the U.S. to stay out any longer. Okay, let's just walk through this final countdown to war. First, Germany makes a huge gamble. They announce they're resuming unrestricted submarine warfare. Basically, they're going to sink any ship they see. Then, an absolutely shocking secret message gets intercepted. By March, more American merchant ships are at the bottom of the Atlantic. And that brings us to the final step in April. And that secret message, wow. It was called the Zimmerman Telegram, and it might just be the single biggest thing that completely torched any last hope of America staying neutral. It was seen as a direct threat and a massive insult to the United States. I mean, can you believe this? Germany was sending a secret proposal to Mexico. They were offering to help Mexico attack the United States, and in return, they'd help Mexico reclaim Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. When this telegram was made public, Americans were absolutely furious. The idea of a foreign power plotting to carve up their country, yeah, that was the final straw. So at this point, war feels pretty much unavoidable. But President Wilson knew he couldn't just say, "They made us mad." He needed to give this war a higher purpose, to frame the decision not just as a reaction, but as a kind of moral crusade. And there it is. With those 6 simple words, Wilson completely elevated the conflict. This wasn't going to be a war about revenge or territory. No, this was an ideological mission. He was arguing that America had to fight to protect democracy itself, an idea that appealed directly to the nation's core values. And once war was declared, it was like a switch was flipped. The U.S. mobilized with incredible speed and on a massive scale. The Selective Service Act was passed, drafting millions of men into the military. American factories totally retooled for wartime production. And soon, the American Expeditionary Force was on its way to Europe.
And you know what? It made a huge difference. The arrival of these fresh American troops and all these new resources completely tipped the balance. It gave the exhausted Allies the manpower and the morale boost they desperately needed to finally break the brutal stalemate of trench warfare and push towards victory.
So that leaves us with the big question, right? Was America's entry into the war really this noble crusade to make the world safe for democracy? Or was it just the unavoidable result of having its ships sunk and its economy tied so closely to one side? The truth, as we've seen, is probably somewhere in the middle, and it's something people still argue about today.